My first commander when I got into the format was a pretty infamous commander, Nico Bolas. The deck was terrible, but one of the first cards that I decided on putting in that deck to be a good old villain was a old card way back in Judgment called Spelljack. Now, Spelljack was this 6 mana counter spell, but what I loved about it was the idea that not only could you counter somebody's spell, but you could also steal that spell for yourself. And just the idea of being able to recreate that equalizer scene with Denzel flipping the gun on the other person, I just loved that idea when I first started playing Commander. And as time has gone on, Wizards has created different iterations of this original card. It's definitely a really fun, casual, powerful effect, but obviously the biggest downplay for this type of spell is its 6 cost, making it rarely viable in any sort of real competitive deck. But in a casual format like Commander, it can create some absolutely amazing moments. Today, I want to talk about a brand new card that was revealed in the Jeskai Commander deck for the upcoming set Tarkir Dragonstorm. And it's, of course, a dragon that I feel like currently is flying under the radar. The card I want to talk about is Transcendent Dragon. This card costs 6 mana, 4 and 2 blue, for a 4/3 dragon with flash. Yes, it's basically Spelljack, but it has wings, and I think that's something that's really big. Here's why Wizards' latest iteration of this card is actually pretty insane. So first, of course, one of the biggest upsides that you can see immediately is that you get a body afterward. With Spelljack, you spend a whole card just to counter steal somebody else's card. With this card, however, you not only get their spell, but you also leave behind a 4/3 vanilla dragon. That's just straight up value. That means that this is an attacker for you in the air, but even better, it is a defensive weapon that you can use against somebody who's trying to attack you with some sort of flying threat. And just the cherry on top, it is a dragon, so that gives you additional synergies if you're playing a dragon deck. Now, I know some of you are probably thinking right now, well, I've seen this ability before, or it's been done before in a creature format, and the answer to that is yes, there have been a couple, and trust me, I've spent some time to actually go through Scryfall and try to find any cards that were very similar to this. And while they have the same upsides as Transcendent Dragon, they actually have quite a bit of downsides that Transcendent Dragon doesn't have. Now, the first one, Kero Spell Snatcher, is pretty cool. It's Spelljack with a morph creature, but when you actually try to play with this card, I've actually found that it's very clunky. I even tried putting it in my Missy morph deck, and even in that deck, it still felt too expensive to actually play. First, having to pay 3 mana just to put it on the battlefield, and then on top of that, have 6 mana for the same turn if plausible, or have to wait a whole turn before you can use it, makes you spend a lot of mana for a potential use of a big turn. Now, Smirking Spelljacker was a recent card in the Commander set of Outlaws of Thunder Junction that's very on theme with exactly what we're talking about. It's a 3/3 flash, and it flies too, so that's a little plus, and it only costs 5 mana. Now, when this card enters the battlefield, you can exile a target spell, and then whenever it attacks, you can cast that spell for free. The problem is its timing. You have to wait until your next turn and be able to attack with that said creature in order for you to get that spell from exile. And if you don't, it just gets stuck there forever. It's a really interesting design, I think personally. There's a way bigger gap in time that your opponents can interact with this and stop you from being able to use the spell that you stole. And then finally, going back to good old Lorwyn, we have Guile, which I think is a card that I think a lot of people have just forgotten about. This is a 6 mana elemental and a 6/6, so it's a pretty big body that essentially turns every single counterspell that you cast in a Spelljack. I think the weakness here is pretty obvious, and I would actually say Guile isn't necessarily the same as Transcendent Dragon. While Transcendent Dragon is a counterspell on its own, Guile requires an extra card for you to get a similar effect. Now, to be fair, if you are running this card in Azorius and you use this in Dubscape, it's pretty much a GG. But outside of that, Guile also doesn't have flash, so you can't really surprise your opponent with this. It has to stick on the battlefield for a while, and then on top of that, you need to have additional mana to play even more cards from your hand that are counterspells for you to really get a reoccurring Transcendent Dragon effect. Cool in theory, and unless you build a deck where effectively it's counterspell.deck, I don't think that Guile is really a good card that would be worthy of a replacement of Transcendent Dragon. So to sum up all these comparisons, Transcendent Dragon covers a lot more weaknesses that the other cards have. It doesn't telegraph itself that easily, and it doesn't make you wait a period of time to use the stolen spell, and unlike Guile, it doesn't require additional setup outside of having 6 mana available to cast the spell. And I know what you're saying, 6 mana is insane for a counter spell, But it's important to understand that when it comes to the Spelljack effect, it seemed like from my research 6 mana was the going rate for this powerful effect. But that this is a creature means that there are additional spells, especially cost reduction spells, that can make this more affordable and easier of a pill to swallow in order to steal somebody's spell. Of course, this could also be reversed with Spelljack with certain decks. If you run a deck where you're instead trying to spell sling or use instants and sorceries, then Transcendent Dragon isn't going to replace Spelljack. But if you are playing a creature heavy deck, Transcendent Dragon might be exactly what you're looking for. And speaking of creature heavy decks, there's 2 decks that I have in my personal collection that when I saw this card, I thought, whoa, I need to put this in these decks. So I want to give you 2 examples of decks where I think that Transcendent Dragon can shine the most, that actually might end up being really cool, or might even spark some ideas in your brain of maybe a commander deck that I didn't even think about in this video that you might say, oh, this would be perfect for this deck. If you do come up with one, I'd love to know in the comment section below. So coming at number 1 is probably one of my favorite signature decks. If you love Cascade, I think Transcendent Dragon offers some insane combo turns when it comes to using Cascade and getting more value off of them. Now, Maelstrom Wonder, if you don't know, is the king of Cascade. It's a Temur commander, and it's mostly known as a creature-heavy deck that's meant to spit out as many creatures as possible and slam them into your opponents to eliminate them before they have a chance to fight back. It's also a very powerful card for its Cascade ability, making it so that when you cast Maelstrom Wonder, you're also casting 2 additional spells absolutely free, though RNG-like from the top of your deck that are less mana value than Maelstrom Wonder. Now, in case you don't know, Cascade goes from the higher cost to the lower cost, which means that since Maelstrom Wonder is an 8-drop, Transcendent Dragon fits perfectly underneath that 8-drop as a 6-drop. So really, the best case scenario with Transcendent Dragon is that it ends up somewhere in your deck near the top, and as you cascade with Maelstrom Wonder on the stack, you hit with one of your cascade triggers, Transcendent Dragon, which then you get to cast for free. It will then enter the battlefield and its ability will trigger because you did in fact cast it, and now you'll be able to counter a spell. Now you might be thinking, well, what am I going to counter? I don't want to. Yes, you're actually going to counter Maelstrom Wanderer. Keep in mind that the 2 cascade triggers are already on the stack as abilities, so even if you counter Maelstrom Wanderer, you're still going to have that extra cascade left on the stack. Because you are technically stealing your own spell, you'll be able to recast Maelstrom Wanderer at that exact moment for free, giving you 2 more additional cascade triggers, and you'll go crazy like Bucky does in Marvel Rivals. It doesn't even have to be just Maelstrom Wonder. If you have any big CMC cascade spells in your deck, I'm looking at you, Call Forth the Tempest. Transcendent Dragon could just let you go again and cast the same spell again and get more value out of it. Now, keep in mind, I'm always doing this in the context of just some casual, cool interactions and fun. I'm pretty sure some people will be like, well, I don't want to pay 6 mana just to get an extra cascade. But in a Maelstrom Wanderer deck, keep in mind, this is also just a flying creature that you can then attack people with on top of that. And if you also have cards like Crystal Shard in your deck, you can then bounce Transcendent Dragon back in your hand and then hold it up as counter magic or a surprise gotcha again if an opponent tries to interact with you or destroy your board state. Now, next, I want to talk about one of my other decks that does something kind of similar, and that's my Joyra of the Gitu deck. This is also one of my favorite pet decks. You'll know that she's known for her ability to suspend huge spells for just 2 mana, and then wait a couple turns for her to then cast those spells for free. And for my deck, the biggest things that I cast with my Joyra deck are Eldrazi. Joyra's playstyle is a little bit different than Maelstrom Wanderer. We're really, with Maelstrom Wanderer, you're trying to be aggressive. Joyra's a little bit slower and plays this more methodical, reactive playstyle, where you're really going to be holding up a lot of mana all the time, and then on people's end steps, that's when you're going to start suspending cards. But outside of course, Transcendent Dragon protecting you with counter magic, it really goes crazy with Eldrazi, since they have very powerful cast abilities. Similar to like Cascade, almost all the big boy titans have very powerful cast abilities that they get the moment you cast them. Now the cool part is because of Joyra, most of the time where you're going to be suspending these Eldrazi, when they come out of suspension and they're on the stack, you can then respond, because you'll definitely have the mana by that point, and cast your Transcendent Dragon in response to you casting the Eldrazi off the stack. You'll still get its cool cast ability, but you'll be able to take the Eldrazi into exile and then immediately cast it again out of exile. This is pretty insane because not only are you getting double value off the cast triggers, but in my deck, I also have things like Passionate Archaeologist, which will once again double the amount of damage that I'm doing to people in their face, or my other pet card, which isn't that great, but I love it in this deck, Echoes of Eternity, which doubles all the triggers. Now you're going to triple the trigger again. And keep in mind that Transcendent Dragon, again, is still a body that we can use to protect ourselves from our opponent's flying threats early game aggro. I just want you to imagine Ulamog the Defiler coming out of exile and you doing this to somebody, or your opponents might be holding up counter magic in order to counter some of your big bombs. Well, it won't matter if Transcendent Dragon hits the stack and then bounces that original spell, basically nullifying the original interaction your opponents tried to do against you, and then you just recast it again, making it hurt even harder. I think that this is really cool with an Eldrazi shell, and it works perfectly, of course, in a Jorah deck because of the type of playstyle. It's really just a casual friendly card that allows you to have those really great strategic moments where you can really outplay somebody at the table and can, without a doubt, cause some of the most amazing, memorable moments that I know everybody loves when they play a game of Commander. So if you can think of other Commander decks that do similar things or play with these similar cards, Transcendent Dragon might be the next best card for your 99.